First of all, I'd like to say Happy New Year to everyone. Happy 2018. It's been a couple of months since I did my last video. I decided I just need a little bit of time off just to recharge my batteries, get on with some of my own personal work, and just generally think about how I was going to move my channel forward in the new year. So now that we're here, I've had a little bit of a recap, and looking back over my videos and some of the questions that people have been putting to me on my channel, I've decided to do a Procreate tutorial. I've already done a different one for the previous version of Procreate, but it's literally about 2 years old now at the time of producing this video. And we've gone from version 3 and now we're on version 4. I've been using Procreate for about 4 years, since sort of like 2013, and now we're at the beginning of 2018, so just over 4 years. First of all, I was using it on the older iPad Airs, and since a couple of years ago, the end of 2015 in fact, I've been using the iPad Pro and the Apple Pencil. I do highly recommend it as a tool. I think it's a fantastic creative canvas in which you can pretty much execute anything that your imagination can come up with. Certainly there are some things perhaps for certain designers, illustrators, or someone that creates artwork that might be able to do on a bigger program like Photoshop, but as an app, I think it does 90% of what most artists and painters and drawers would actually require from Photoshop anyway. So the makers of Procreate have actually created a PDF or an ebook in which you can actually look through all the different functions of Procreate, but I thought I'd take that as a basis to create a video. So rather than plowing through hundreds of pages of a PDF, you could just sit and watch this video. I'm going to split it into the sections, so if you look in the description, you can jump to the section that you feel that would be most appropriate to what you need to know. Obviously, I've done this kind of tutorial before, so there's going to be quite a lot of overlap, but there are some functions. There's quite a lot actually that's changed over the last couple of years, so there will definitely be some things that feature in this, and also perhaps I didn't thoroughly cover some of the other areas in my previous app guide that I'm going to be doing a lot more thoroughly in this one. So when you first get Procreate and you open it up, there will be a sample few images in the actual gallery area. Now this is obviously full of my individual artwork and projects, so it won't look like this. It'll be the example images that they give you, but I'm just going to open up one of my images just to explain some of the basic functions of the interface. So as we go around the canvas and the work area, you can see there's various different symbols. We have just come from the gallery, and this is the gallery button to go back, and you click on an image to go back into it. Across the top, we've got various different icons that mean different things. Now, just very basically, we start off on the brush or the paint icon. I'm going to go into lots of detail about this. I'm just running through the basic interface first. Then we've got a smudge icon, which is really good for blending. We've got an eraser. We've got all the different layers that appear here. And we've got the color selection tool here. Switching across the other side, we've got a transform tool. We've got a selection tool, which means you can draw around specific shapes and areas. We've got the adjustments tool, which you can change various different aspects of your image. And we've got an actions. So this is where you sort of share things or import things along with lots of other stuff. And also the gallery, which I just showed you, goes back to the actual gallery. Then you've got the brush slider, which controls the brush size. You've got a modify button, and I'll show you more about what this does later. You've got the brush opacity there, so you can have it on full strength or fade it down. And you've also got the undo and redo buttons. Now I've not done anything just now, and it tends to become blank when you've not done anything for a while. So that's the basic interface anyway. Now in terms of the gestures, you can see I've been using the Apple Pencil. I'm going to cover that in a lot more detail, but the basic gestures that you can use are going to be zooming in and out. You can rotate. If I was to change something and I've just moved something up here and I wanted to undo it, I would do 2-finger tap and it would undo that, and 3-finger tap would redo the last thing that I've done. If I decide that I'm working like this and I want to fit my image to the canvas, I can quickly do that again. Just quickly do a pinching motion on top of the screen anywhere, and it will quickly fit the image to the canvas. And like I was just showing you before, you can use the sliders to accurately control the brush size and the opacity as well. Another thing you can do with the slider by moving it out is that you can move it up and down so that it fits better. We'll also be featuring showing you how you would move things to another part of the screen later. If you decide that you don't really need to use any of these, you're just using one kind of tool, like just the pencil sketch, and you just want to get lost in the image and lose the interface completely, take your 4 fingers, click like that, and it just disappears all the different functions. And to bring them back, you just do the 4 fingers again. So that's the basics of the interface and the gestures. And now I'm going to spend a bit more time going in a bit more detail on how you would create canvases and how you use the various different tools, etc. So to begin with, when you arrive in your gallery, you're going to perhaps want to create a canvas in order to do a painting or drawing on it. Now the Procreate file system is really good. I mean, it actually goes into detail in the handbook, explaining that this sort of native file format takes up less space on the iPad, it loads more quickly, it allows for layered files, easy to share, and it goes into some of the advantages of it. But it is a really good format actually. It's a very similar kind of format to Procreate, to Photoshop rather, so you can import Photoshop files and it'll work quite well on here, and you can take your files on here and share it with your desktop as a Photoshop file too. So they function in very similar ways. But when you want to create a canvas, there is a little plus symbol and it gives you some more options here on how to create a new canvas. You'll see that automatically it comes up with some different presets. Now I've created my own preset there as well, but it gives you some basic ones. It will have a square, a 4K resolution, an A4 resolution, and a 4x6 or a 6x4 inch sort of resolution. If you've created a preset and you want to edit it, get rid of it, then you just swipe to the left and you can do things with it. So I'm going to delete that one. I no longer need that preset one. You can also slide it so that you can edit it. You can change the aspects of it, including the dimensions. You can change the name of it, all sorts of things like that. But I'm not going to do that just yet. But if you want to create a custom size, so a canvas size of your own, you can choose your own width, now either in pixels, as it's set here, or you can change the format to inches, centimeters, millimeters, whichever you want to work in. So you might have a specific project that you are working on and you know you want it to be a photo size or to fit a frame or whatever. And if you know the dimensions in a real world kind of measurements, then you might choose to do it in inches. And then also you can set the DPI in an area like this. So obviously the dots per inch is your DPI and you can change that there. So according to Procreate, the canvas size can be anything between 1 times 1 pixel to a massive 16K in any direction. And obviously that depends on the iPad model that you're using. But if you're going to create an absolutely enormous canvas, that is going to massively reduce the number of layers that you're able to use. So that really helpful function of being able to use layers is going to be restricted if you go crazy on the resolution on the DPI, or the size is in centimeters or pixels. But you can try it yourself. You can create some super panoramic compositions or some really tall ones or squares, whatever it is that suits your particular project. So experiment. Another aspect of this is the color. So you can go with the standard sort of sRGB colors, or you have the P3 wide color, which creates really sort of vibrant greens, very saturated reds, greens and oranges. But that only works if you have a device that actually will display that. So if you're transferring this to a device that doesn't really show this off, then it's questionable whether you even need the P3 wide color gamut. And if you're going to print it off, the chances are it won't really demonstrate. Well, it's not going to show that off as well. But whilst you're using on the devices that will actually show that, then that could be something that you really enjoy using. I personally will stick to the standard color, but it's nice that you have that option. So that's how generally you would change the settings. Once you're happy with your choice, you can then click create, and then you can see there I've created a really bizarre looking canvas, but that might happen to be the kind of canvas that suits your project. I'm going to get rid of it though, because it's not going to be of any use to me. Another way of creating a canvas in here is to import, and you can import it from various different locations. It might be on your iCloud drive, you might have a Google Drive or a Dropbox, for example. It might be you've got some files located on your iPad. Now, especially the newer operating system, the iOS 11 has a file system. So you can actually, if you've got any files on your iPad, and I've not really used that as of such yet, but if you had, you'd be able to then just open those in Procreate. Another thing you can do is import from your photos. So you might have something stored here, and then you can just import it straight from there, like so. Now, in terms of the supported file types, you can actually import other Procreate files that you may have transferred from other iPads, obviously, or you may have stored it on your desktop. You want to transfer the file across. You can open Photoshop files, so PSD files, TIFF format, PNG and JPEG. Now, when it comes to organizing your artwork, you can move your images around. So if you press and hold, it will sort of pop, and then you can drag and drop it around. Also, if you swipe on an image, it gives you the option to share, to duplicate, or to delete. If you were to share it, you can share it as different file formats. You've obviously got the Procreate, which is the native file within the program or the app. You've got the PSD, which is the Photoshop, PDF, JPEG, PNG, and TIFF formats there. If you want to do bulk actions, you can press select at the top, and then obviously it gives you the little circle if you've selected it. You can do various things. You can share, you can duplicate, you can delete, or you can stack them. Now, if you stack something, so I'll just do that because as you see it's a duplicate, I would really delete one of them just for the purposes of this. I'm going to stack them by selecting them both, and you see here that it's placed one over the top of the other, and I can actually click on here and just put, it's just for demonstration purposes, I've got a duplicate there, and there it's retitled it. So another thing you can do with your canvases, even whilst it's in the gallery, is you can rotate it so that when you open it up, now that is the new format of that particular file, and it remembers that. Interesting. Sometimes I know when I start a piece of work myself, especially when it's slightly more on the abstract side, or if it starts as the doodle, you may change your mind about how it's going to be positioned, and just a really quick, easy way of just controlling that, even within the gallery, is just to rotate it. Just like I was showing you how you could rename the stacks or the folders, you can do that on individual paintings or pieces of artwork here by clicking on it. So you just click on the name and retype whatever you want, and then you're done. So if you have two images that you want to stack together manually instead of using the select button, you can just press and hold one, move it over the top, and it will turn the image underneath it blue, let go, and then you'll notice they've stacked them together. If you want to unstack them, go into the folder, press the image you want to take out of that stack, hold it onto the stack, you'll notice the words turn blue, and when you let go, then it's unstacked them. So it separates them back out into individual visible formats again. Once you do have a stack, what you'll find is that the front image takes priority. You can't really take a single image and stack it over the top. That's not going to work. You'll try it again. Look, if you try and do that, it turns blue, but it won't stack it. What you can do is place the bigger stack on top of an image, and then it formats it like that. So in addition to holding it over there till it turns blue, you can pick it up, move it, and then with another finger, click the stack button, and then it gives you the option to place it somewhere else as well. If you decide you're wanting to share various artworks or stacks, and you've decided to share it as JPEGs, it then will give you the various different options of where you're going to actually share it to. So you can share it to files, you can share it to iTunes, or send it in a message, obviously. Alternatively, it is possible to share to iTunes. Apparently, it's really good for backups, and good for speedy transfers, things like that, but it's not something that I personally ever do, but it is an option too. Now I'm going to go into a canvas. I've already given you a very brief overview of the different sort of functions anyway, but I've got a piece of work that I'm currently working on at present. So just to run through some of the finger gestures again, when you've got the settings set to standard, I'm just going to go onto the standard gesture settings. So selected tool would be the standard settings. So your finger can act as a brush. It would be your smudge tool. If I'm on a particular layer that's visible, let's go onto a layer where you can actually see the smudge tool, like so. It would also be your eraser as well. So your finger would be the main way of actually interacting. Personally, I would tend to deactivate the finger gestures that actually use the tools, and I just use the Apple Pencil instead, but I will go into that a little bit more detailed later. You can see that I've just been double tapping with two fingers to undo that. If I want to redo, it's 3 fingers, 2 fingers to undo. Now if I want to create, whilst I'm on here, a quick line, so I do a wobble here, and I hold it down for a period of time, and you'll notice it snaps to a line. That's generally more useful, perhaps when it's a fine line and you're doing something more architectural or something more precise. And you can also notice by continuing to hold on, by moving it, you can change the length of it, as well as the sort of angle of it. If you decide you want to clear a layer and you use 3 fingers like that, and use a backwards and forwards motion, you'll find that it scrubs and deletes the entire layer. I don't want to do that because I've put a lot of time and effort in. But sometimes you just want to clear a layer, you want to start from scratch quickly without having to go into the settings on the layer. That's a quick option for doing that. Zooming in and out, obviously, is the sort of pinching, quite straightforward. I think we're all used to that gesture now on mobile phones and all sorts of devices. Again, we're rotating canvas, pretty straightforward stuff. As I showed you earlier, quickly pinch outwards. So if you start like this and you decide you want to see the whole canvas as big as possible, pinch outwards and it fits into the screen. If you wish to have a detail that you've selected and you want to copy and paste it, then you 3 fingers down and it gives you the option. Now I've got nothing selected at the moment. I mean, if I press copy, it will copy the entire layer. And if I paste it again, you'll see that it's doubled up that layer. So now when I go onto here, you'll notice that I've got a repeat of that layer, which can be quite useful because you can see how it's intensified the layer in itself actually, because you can see through a lot of the gestures. You won't necessarily have painted everything on a layer 100%. So by doubling it up, it can sometimes really intensify and make that layer look more interesting. But obviously there are shortcuts to that, so you can just copy and paste and it will do it quickly as well. If you want to get rid of all the tool bars and extra clutter on the screen, 4 fingers, tap, gets rid of it and you can just work. I don't tend to use that very often because I don't find that the interface interferes very much at all. It's a very, very streamlined operating system, or interface rather, so I don't find it interferes at all. It's not like some of the other programs out there where you have various different wheels and boxes that are in the middle of the screen cluttering up the interface. This is really quite minimal to begin with, so to be honest, that's something that occasionally I might do inadvertently, but it's never something I would do deliberately. When you actually on layers, there are different gestures that you can use to affect the layers too. So one of the ones that I do use quite a bit is to merge different layers. So if you wanted to select a whole selection of layers and just make it into one flat image, you can do it like that, just by pinching and dragging them together. I don't wish to do that right at the moment, but it demonstrates that it is quite a useful function. That's something I will definitely use. As I go further and further with a painting, I find it very staged. I've got too many layers and sometimes they can just be condensed and pinched together, and I will do that. Whilst you're in layers, it is also possible to select different layers. So just by tapping with your finger, you will select the different layer, and then swiping will select it as a secondary layer as well. Another quick way of getting access to the layer opacity is to double tap it, and it will instantly jump to the opacity controls, and then by swiping left or right, you'll probably just notice some details there that disappear as I go down on the opacity and then increase as I go upwards with the opacity. So that's just a quick way of accessing that. So I'll just demonstrate that again on another layer. We go onto here, double tap on that layer with 2 fingers. Whoops, I've got the layer switched, and I'll try that one. Double tap, and you'll notice that blue slider at the top. By sliding left and right, you'll notice that the changes that I've made along the way. Another thing you can do with the layer is alpha lock it. So if you just take 2 fingers and swipe to the right, when you tap on there, you'll notice now that it's alpha locked it. I'll go into more detail about what that actually means later on, but just to give you the information on how to access that. If you tap on a layer with 2 fingers instantly, if you tap and hold with 2 fingers, it will give you access to all the information on that layer. You can see where it's selected it, where it hasn't. Perhaps one of the biggest sections you really need to cover in this is going to be the brushes. Now the brushes is this symbol at the top. By clicking on it, you can access all the information about brushes. Now the brushes system works on the basis that there are different aspects to it. So you're going to get the shape of the actual brush and the grain. And then the combination of the two results in what you see as the actual brush itself. So it is the overall shape and then that texture, which is the grain. Now you notice here you've got a nice sort of scrolling list. It's not excessively long unless you've imported loads of your own. But within each of these, you can get all sorts of different pencils or inking, brushes or airbrush, some textures and elements and things like that as well. I generally stick with the pencils. I mean, I'm quite a traditional artist personally, so when I'm starting a piece of work, I'll choose either a HB pencil or a 6B pencil. But if you like more expressive sort of mark making with larger drawing formats like pastels and charcoals, then this might be quite useful for you. Here's some more charcoals. You can actually rearrange them. If you want all your favorite brushes at the top, you can just hold and drag them and move them around, because you may not want some of them, whereas some of them you use all the time. So I know I use the airbrushes pretty much all the time. I'll put that at the top. I use sketching a lot, and the rest of them I may use occasionally. If you want to move various ones quickly, you can do that and then move them all, and you can move them all to a different section, for example. I'll just run that by you again. So just by clicking or swiping to the right and then pressing and holding, you can move the whole stack of them or a whole load of them into a different area. If you swipe brush, you can see you can share it, you can duplicate it, and you can even reset it. Now, if you've changed some of the information within that brush, then resetting it sometimes can be quite useful, because you might just find that through their experiments that you've kind of done something really weird with it and you don't quite know how you've managed to arrive at that. So having that reset option can be really a lifesaver. And obviously if you manage to duplicate it, then you've got two versions. One you can experiment with, and one that's the original version. So you can keep both the original and the experimental version as well. And then if you decide you don't want that experimental version anymore, then obviously you can just delete that. If you want to share it, it will share it as a .brush file, and you can share it in all the kind of usual ways. So you can send it as in a message or an email, or you can save it somewhere. Now, importing brushes is obviously one of the things that people may wish to do. By clicking on the plus symbol, you will open up different other options. Now, if you've got a .brush file somewhere else and you tap on it, you're probably going to be prompted to import that brush, and Procreate will be one of the options. So that's one way of doing it. Or if you're from here, then you can actually import it, and if you've got it saved somewhere, then you can click it here and it will import it into Procreate too. You can also, if you've got an extra window open, drag and drop brushes into the brush set as well. Now, in terms of the advanced brush settings, so if you were using like the charcoal and you click on it, then you're going to get more advanced settings. So if we start at the bottom on the stroke, you'll notice that you've got various different aspects here. The first one is spacing. So if you control spacing, is the amount of gap and space added between each plot point into your stroke. So it increases the space, will create gaps in your brush. So this is a streamline, and as it says in the ebook, this stabilizes your strokes in real time for perfect precision curves and flourishes. So the higher the value, the more streamline will smooth your strokes out. Now you've got jitter here as well. So it refers to the amount of distance by which your shape will be offset from the stroke plot. So smaller values will look more like a solid line. So when you're down here, you can see that in the little visualization. Or higher values will spread the shape out and hide the visible line you actually draw. Fall off affects the visible length of your stroke, and you can see that, so it shortens the length. You've also got the stroke sort of taper settings here. So if I go onto a brush that perhaps is a little bit clearer, if I go on to inking perhaps, go onto a studio pen, and you can notice it getting thicker or thinner, tapering off at the start, or it could taper off at the end. The opacity stroke taper allows you to adjust the amount of opacity applied to a taper as well. So you just need to experiment a little bit with these, and you've got the size of the stroke taper. So it allows you to adjust the size of the taper. So you just need to experiment a little bit. There's no really right or wrong with these. It's just a question of fine-tuning the brushes that you want. Personally, it's not something that I get too involved in, and more often than not, I will just reset whatever changes I've made, because I like the default settings usually. We'll move on to the shape settings, and you've got the scatter effect. I'll move on to, again, I need to move on to a brush really that demonstrates this a bit better. If we go into maybe a painting, try that one. Okay, so it seems to change the orientation of the brush as your stroke progresses. So the higher value, you can see there's more raggedy, more kind of messy, and then it's more uniform as you turn that down. So you can see really nice straight edges on there. When I turn it up, it's like it's just rotating and changing the position of the stroke, so you get a real messier edge. The rotation, it says, affects how your brush reacts to directional change. So a range of unique effects can be achieved from this, from a flat calligraphy brush to ribbon effects. The rotation slider has 3 main points. So 100% inverse makes the shape rotate inversely to stroke direction. It's not something that, to be honest, I'm really got to grips with, but you may find it useful. Now, randomized is quite an interesting option. It can give perhaps a more organic, more natural feel, because it just changes more randomly the direction of the stroke. So the beginning of every mark that you make is going to be a bit more organic, a bit more unique. So if you're wanting to create something that is more painterly and looks like the kind of random effects of a brush, then using the randomized shape properties would be really quite useful. Now the azimuth here, it describes it as being used for brushes where the direction of the brush shape on the canvas should be the same as the direction of the Apple Pencil, just like a calligraphy pen nib. So this is going to be really useful for anyone wishing to do sort of writing and calligraphy effects. So turning azimuth on will make the shape follow the perpendicular angle of the Apple Pencil. So that's going to be really useful for some people. Now grain, so you've got movement here in the grain. And it describes it as when it's set to stamp, which is at this end of the spectrum, the texture will not roll at all. So you'll get a very kind of smeared effect to the grain. But when it's set to rolling, you'll notice a lot more texture, and you can see that as I draw here, you'll see the texture. So if I just go and demonstrate it from the other end and draw it, you'll see a much more smeared effect. And then we've got scale. So if you reduce the scale of the texture, you're going to get a really small texture that's so compacted you won't even notice it. Or if I turn it up, you'll notice the grain and the texture a lot more. When you've got zoom set to follow size at this end of the spectrum, it will scale the texture with your brush shape. When set to cropped, if I move it to the other end, so the grain is locked and the brush shape will scale independently from the grain. So again, something you just need to experiment with a little bit. Then we've got rotation. So you see by moving it, you can see that it rotates the grain as well. So it's quite similar to grain movement. The more I move it to that end, it gives a more smeared look. It's tilting it that way. I move it that way, it's tilting it that way, but it's smearing it. So the best kind of grain in a way is the way it's slap bang in the middle. And then we've got a filtered thing here. If it's off, apparently it's going to cause the grain to become more jagged and coarse. When it's filtered or is on, it's going to give a kind of softer edge to things, apparently. We've got dynamics. It's by default set to normal. So each brush rendering option affects the overall behavior of your brush and provides access to different dynamic settings. So on normal, the normal mode will allow your stroke to build over time and has no special dynamic settings. But when you're unglazed, your brush will paint in a uniform, transparent manner and will no longer build up over time. Because of this, the glazed effect behaves exactly the same as default sort of Photoshop brushes. And then you've got the wet mix. And this mode gives your brush a wet look and adds a number of settings to affect the dilution of the paint. So the amount of paint applied and how much your brush will pull paint around on the canvas. You've got opacity speed, down to normal. So the opacity will vary depending on the speed of your stroke. And you've got jitter, so the stroke will vary in opacity as it is stamped across the canvas. You've got size speed, the size will vary depending on the speed of your stroke. And then the bottom one, size jitter, the stroke will vary in size as it's stamped across the canvas. Now again, this is not something I tend to get involved in. This is fairly deep into the settings. Personally, I don't have a lot of use for it, but it's good to know these options. So within glaze, you've got pretty much the same kind of factors there, and within this one as well. You've also got dilution, charge, attack, and pull. In terms of what they mean, dilution is directly related to the paint characteristics. So varying values of dilution will create different levels of water in your paint. So it's not real water, it's just the water effect. So when a high amount of dilution is applied to your brush, the brush will mix more paint with each stroke. Then you've got charge. So charge refers to the amount of virtual paint applied to a brush. So literally like charge, how much it's got loaded. For instance, when you set to 0, the virtual paint will run out almost instantly. And the charge setting is great for traditional artists. Then you've got attack. So attack is a pressure-based setting designed for use with Apple Pencil. So the higher your attack setting, the more variation in the stroke shape with pressure. The more pressure you apply, the more of the shape area is applied to the canvas, just like pressing harder with a physical brush. And then we've got pull. I'm just reading from the manual for this, so it perhaps saves you the effort of having to go through it, but it's not something that I get involved in, so it is perhaps necessary for me to read this for you. So the pull feature is best used in combination with dilution and affects how much paint your brush will pull around on the canvas. A brush with high pull and low charge will act a bit like a smudge. So then we've got the opacity dynamics as before, and you may have the size dynamics as well. So let's concentrate on the pencil settings. Now, like I said, the pencil is what I tend to use more. So you've got the pressure opacity, you've got a slider here, and I'll just show you with the Apple Pencil. So when set to 0, which is in the middle, in actual fact, if you can get it on that, it's quite difficult to get, there you go. The brush will not react to pressure changes at all. So when set to max, which is up here, the more pressure will make the stroke opacity stronger, and obviously the inverse, 100% inverse, more pressure will make the stroke transparency increase. We've got pressure bleed. So the pressure bleed applies a threshold to your entire brush, which is then mapped to pressure. A high bleed setting means that the brush will have less detail and impacts with light strokes. So the brush detail will bleed through to the canvas as pressure is increased. Size is obviously a pretty fundamental one, just like opacity. So this is when you press on more, then it's going to get bigger, and this is when you press on more, you're going to get a smaller version. Pressure softening is not something that I've really investigated too much, but when set to 0, any changes in pressure will be immediately acted upon. So larger values will smooth out the pressure response, which is excellent for getting gradual changes with glazed brushes. So lower values will give brushes a quick response in changes in pressure. We've also got the tilt options. So it affects the tilt angle. You may get you can show how sensitive it's going to be, how much you'd actually have to tilt the pencil in order to get a response. So if you set it so that you have to tilt it quite a lot, then these aren't going to be affected until you've actually tilted it. You can change the opacity, the gradation, bleed size, all the other kind of things. So let's go into general. You can change the brush name if required. You can have a preview, is either off or on. You can change the size of the preview. You can also change the behavior of the brushes. So you can have it so it orientates to the screen. You can have different blend modes. So we'll experiment with some of these in a little while, but you can see the different settings here. So size limits, you can have a maximum or a minimum, and you can have opacity limits too. When we come to the source, this is perhaps one of the really useful elements for really modifying your actual brush. So for example, you can invert it, you can insert a photo, so you can change the entire shape or the grain by inserting a photo. You can really modify it, you can create your own brushes this way. Obviously you've done it over the top of another one, so you're changing a specific brush in there, but you could choose to add your own brush set as well. Now it's important to bear in mind that the white areas is actually going to be the bit that impacts. So that is the bit that Mark makes. The black areas where it's not going to have any impact, and the white areas is the bit where it's going to have any impact. Now, when it comes to making custom brushes, that is what the plus symbol is for, and that's perhaps a better way of doing it than really modifying some of the preset brushes. So here you can see it's actually blank, so you can create your own brushes. So here you get to choose the shape and the grain. So these are the two elements of a brush that are really important. So the shape is going to be the outline of the actual stroke that you make. So it might be a very geometric shape, or it might be more of a kind of irregular looking shape, and then that mixed with the kind of filter or the texture, that is the grain, the two combined is going to create the actual brush effect. Obviously there's nothing there to invert at the moment, so you can insert a photo or swap from Pro Library. So this is something you just need to experiment with. It's not something I've done a lot of, but it's definitely perhaps worth a go at. So if you were actually in here, you can actually alter the brushes and the grain and things like that actually within. If you wanted to invert what you've got, double tapping with, you've got the option there anyway, but if you wanted to do it as a gesture, you can do it with your fingers. Now, if you want to share the set, you've got the option there of sharing it in the usual kind of formats and methods, and you can also drag and drop it into different areas too. So when it comes to the smudge tool, it works much like the brushes. So if you're on the smudge, you can actually choose from all the different textures. All the different options that I've run through with the brushes are just as applicable with the smudge tool as well. If you actually go onto the brush here, you have the option of how aggressively the actual smudge tool is going to impact your work. So if you want it to just be a bit more gradual like that, You see, it's a really good way of mixing things together. Or if you want it to be really quite aggressive, you'll see that it preserves a bit more of the kind of texture. So this is a way of sort of blurring and blending, whereas this is like you've got a real kind of coarse, rough blending together. So experiment a little bit, you'll find the right and appropriate kind of textures and level of smudging for you. It's a really good way of getting a very natural look of real painting. Now, it's not something I tend to use very often. I tend to use airbrush and go for much less visible textures in my actual smudging anyway. So it's not as applicable to my work, but for plenty of people who like to do images that look like they've been using real kind of oil paint, then this is going to be an incredibly useful function. When it comes to the eraser, again, you have all the same functions, so you can erase in an interesting way. So just like if you were using like real charcoals, for example. I remember when I was at art college, if I was doing life drawing, it would be almost as important your use of the eraser as it would be the actual charcoal itself. So you can actually use, for example, like a charcoal texture on your eraser, and you could actually use that to erase, and you can obviously control the strength of it and the size of the brush, and the opacity varies according to tilt and pressure on the pencil as well, depending on what settings you've got it on the Apple Pencil settings. Another method of erasing or redoing is to use the gestures. So if you use the double finger, it will undo all the gestures. 3-finger tap will redo, or if you want to slide through all of the gestures quickly, or all of the marks you've done quickly, tap 2 fingers and hold, and it'll race through them. Likewise, if you want to redo, hold down the 3 fingers, and it'll whiz through them quite quickly. I tend to do it individually just because you can go back to the specific point, and what you find if you hold it down is it can whiz past the point at which you wanted to stop a bit too quickly. Another thing obviously you can do with a layer is to clear the layer. So by sliding to the left, you've got the option, you can just clear it like that. So various different ways of deleting your work. If I just go to an appropriate brush for this demonstration and choose a clear brush setting. Now, when you're using the Quickline, you can, as I showed you before, if you create something, you're aiming for a solid line, but it's gone a bit wonky, like so. If you hold it at the end, it will snap to a line. By moving it up and down, you can change it. You can also you can shorten it or lengthen it and really adjust that line to be specifically where you want it to be. If you know you want to adjust your line by a specific angle, and you've drawn a line like so, and you want to move it by 15-degree increments, if you hold another finger down on the screen and then move it, it will adjust that line, like I say, in 15-degree increments. If you find you've drawn a line and you want to change it, click the transform tool, and this will allow you to, after the fact, adjust. Now what you'll find, as I was showing you, is that if you do it quickly, it's not going to snap. What you have to do is hold it. Now, the length of time that you hold it for some of you, that might be too short a length of time. You might do that naturally and not want it to snap to a straight line. You want to preserve the initial mark that you made without it automatically snapping to a straight line afterwards. So it is something you can change in the settings on the Quickline delay to a much longer period, so 1.5 seconds. And I've drawn a line. I have to really hold it for quite a long time now before it snaps. I'll just show you if I reduce that. Now it might be a bit too quick, so you can either disable it, or if you have it really a short amount of time, you'll notice now that it just almost instantly, as soon as I stop, my finger's still on the screen and it snaps. So that's perhaps a bit too quick for some people. I generally have it somewhere a little bit sort of in the middle-ish. So I very definitely have to intend it, but it doesn't take forever. I don't get fed up before it actually does it. Now, one of the other really important sections, obviously, is going to be the colours and the colour interface. Now, you've got different ways of viewing that. So you've got the classic sort of interface here. You've got the disk, you've got the values, and you've got the palettes. So there's various different things along the bottom there. So this is the way it used to be. I've gotten used to using the disk these days, but it's whatever suits you. If you tap and hold on here, it will revert to the previous colour that you were using. So if you know you've just changed the colour and you want to go back immediately back, like I say, I've been using black and white, so by pressing and holding it, it keeps reverting back to the previous colour, which happens to be black and white at the moment. So that perhaps is going to be one of the most basic ways of switching backwards and forwards between colours. Another method, if I go back to an actual image now, choose another picture that I've done, if you want to select one of the colours that happens to be on your picture, just hold down your finger, let go, and you can see it selected it there. So now when I start using it, you can see that it's now using that colour on the canvas. There is another method for doing this. If you hold this and click anywhere on there, this is perhaps a quicker method of doing that. It's basically the same as what I just did. It's just otherwise you'd have to click and hold for a while before it does that. If you want to do it like instantly, you can just do it by holding down the symbol at the side, and you can see that this keeps changing now according to everything I touch, simply by holding this icon here. If you want to adjust the length of time that it takes to access a colour, you can change the eyedropper settings here. So I've got it set to these different settings. You can change the settings as well. Now I've got it to 2.4 of a second. It's just the right kind of amount of time for me. So I can access that by either touching and holding the icon at the side and tapping with the Apple Pencil, or holding that and then touching, just like I demonstrated. But you can have it on the other ones. I just think to access it by touching is going to be a little bit, you're going to do it inadvertently. You're not going to intend to do it every time you touch the screen, but you could set it to that. I just personally think that would be a bit too much. Okay, so when it comes to the colour disc, which is the one I use the most, you've got all the colours around the outer part of the disc. So that literally is all your different colours, but you've also got the strength of colour, so whether the light and dark, you've got sort of greyed out versions, you've got a real saturated, intense, vivid versions, and you can see exactly what you're picking by the colour changing up here. So this shows the previous colour that you've had, this shows what you've just been selecting now. So the previous colour I was drawing with or had selected was this, but the one I'm currently changing is the one next to it. It's useful to have the two side by side, then if you're making a slight change, slightly darker, then you can compare the two like that. So once you've found the perfect kind of hue around the outside, if you pinch like this, you can really focus on this, so you can do the two separately. So you're not going to be confused. What I do find sometimes is because I'm doing that and this, it is a little bit confusing to the eye. Whereas if you just go in the center, push it out, then you can really focus on the saturation of it. Pinch back in and you've gone back to things. So select your hue or your color at the outside, push or pinch outwards, and then you get to choose the saturation, pinch it back in, and you go back to the full version of the whole disc. If you're on the classic color picker, you've got the hue here, you've got the saturation, and you've got the light and dark at the bottom as well. So you can see it moving up the different axes for the saturation and the light and dark. So when it comes to values, you really can control it here. If you've got color presets or somebody's given you the exact figures and numbers, you can actually change it to being incredibly accurate here with the various different numbers, the levels of red, green and blue, and the other aspects as well. Something I've never been involved in, I've never really been so concerned. I tend to judge things by eye more than anything else, but if there's a very specific colours that you require for something to be uniform, then you do have the various different numbers and settings here that you can take note of. When it comes to saving a colour that you actually like, or a set of colours that you might actually like, then you can do that by creating colour swatches or palettes. So you can see here I've got some particular colours that are already saved from a different picture, and because they're already here, they're accessible and they will automatically put it there. Now if there's a colour here, for example, that I know I want, I can put it here. So I can choose all sorts of different colours to actually create a new colour swatch too. If I want to reorder them, I can press and hold and I can move it to a different area. So I can rearrange the two. So if I want to move the green more over to this position, you can see it's rearranged it. If you decide you want to get rid of one of them, hold it down, and then it deletes it. Obviously, if you've got old palettes that you've created, They may be set here. There's various sort of default ones that are here naturally anyway. And if you want to add them, you can rename them here, type it in, and then you're done. And if you want to pick any of these, you can just choose to put it as your default, and you go back onto here and it's going to be there waiting for you. So obviously you can rename your palettes. You can click and hold and drag them and move them around. All the same kind of function. And once you get a little bit familiar with Procreate, you're going to find that most of its functions sort of apply throughout. So you can change the order of your brushes, of various different things, including palettes. Again, just like you can with other things, so you can share and you can delete it too. If another artist has shared their color swatches or their palette, then you can actually drag and drop them into here as well. Or another option you have is to fill areas with color. Best way of doing that, if you've got a particular area or a shape that you want to just block in with color and you've got it selected here, hold it down, let go, and it fills the area. So it depends on your setting. I mean, if you've got a particular shape, so if I created another layer with my shape here, I can create a shape that's closed. If I zoom in, you'll see it a bit more clearly. I've got a blue line that goes around there, and I just click and hold it and fill it. You'll see that it's filled that shape, and it does it on maximum opacity. You can see some of the other areas will be on a different layer, which is why they're more visible. So if I'll show you, remove that layer, you can see it is a solid fill. So if you were to drag and drop like this, by holding your finger down and then moving it left and right, you can actually change the drop threshold. Now it's not working particularly effectively with the image and the layers that I've got here, but if you're trying to just fill a particular sort of shape and it's going out of it, you can actually turn the threshold up or down, and it's either going to flood that area or flood outside of that area, depending on the threshold. So it behaves very much like the paint bucket tool in Photoshop. Okay, and another aspect that I've mentioned, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on, is the actual layers. Now, this is the layers tab. If you press on it, you get access to the layers that you've used. I find it really useful because sometimes you want to experiment on a separate layer without damaging the artwork or the stage you've already got to. So in order to create a new layer, there's a little plus symbol, press on that and it will layer a new one there. You can rename it by pressing on it, gives you an option there. You can select, copy, fill, all the different options are there as well. If you're wanting to do something or any effects or changes you want to make into the primary layer, which is the one you've got selected like this will automatically be done. But if you want to do the same effects to various different layers at once without merging them, you've got the main one selected by tapping it, but then you can just quickly swipe to the right and then you'll affect all of those layers as well. And to undo that effect, you just click on a layer. So that's the primary layer. So everything you do on that layer will affect that layer. But if you want everything you do on that layer to also affect all the other layers, just swipe those and it will also change those. So for example, if you are working on this and you want to change the opacity of this, it will change the opacity of those to linked layers as well, but without merging them. If when you have two selected, you want to make a group out of those, you can do that by pressing the button there. So you can see it's created new groups. So there's your primary layer. You created a group. If you click on here, it's now made it into a group. So you can fold that group down so you can see just the title of the group, or you can open it down so it expands and shows you what's in that group as well. And obviously you can rename that group to be whatever you want. Just helps you organize a bit because you might really have a lot of different layers. So it might be appropriate to create different groups of layers. If you want to move layers around, you press and hold and then you can rearrange them just like you can with all the other different areas. If you want to make that particular layer invisible, you've got the little button there. So anything on that layer will either become visible or invisible if you check the box or uncheck it. If you want to change the properties of a layer, so you're on this layer and you want to go into the settings, press the N, you can change the opacity, you can change the different factors here. So you want to go back to normal, it kind of resets it, or you can multiply, linear burn, color burn. You've also got the lighten effects. You can normal, lighten, screen, add, color dodge. You really just have to see what works for your work of art in this particular example. There's nothing you can do to damage it because you just click on normal and it goes back to the original image you're working on anyway. If you wish to merge down a layer, you can merge it down. It merges it with the layer underneath. I'm just going to undo all the adjustments I've just made because I want to make sure that I'm not damaging. It's a current piece of work that I'm working on. I don't want to permanently damage or affect it. But I'll just show you that again. So if you click on it, you can merge it down and it combines those two layers together. But it only merges it down with the active layer and the one immediately below it. I've shown you earlier on where you can pinch. You can do that with a group, or you can do that with two individual ones, and it will merge those two layers together. Another option you have is the background layer. Now, there's not much you can do with it other than remove it. So you might have a design that you want to print onto a t-shirt or something and you don't want a background on it. But if it's just going to be a regular painting, you might want a flat colour. You could insert the flat colour as an actual controllable layer which you can draw on as well, but if you just want it as a background layer, then there's your option. So if you want to access other options within the layer by tapping it, you'll see various different options here. So you can rename it. I've already gone over that. If you press select, it selects everything on that layer. So you can do various different things from here. You can transform your selection, copy it, paint inside of it, or any other applicable kind of action really. When you're finished and you're happy with that, just press the selection thing and it will come out of that option. You can copy the options or everything within that layer to your clipboard. So therefore, if you open another canvas, you can paste it onto that canvas, for example, or you can email it or put it opening it in another app as well. You can fill a layer with the color that's automatically selected. I don't want to do that. You can clear the layer, is here. You can employ your alpha lock. You can apply a mask, and you've got some various different options here as well. Another really useful function within your layers is if you tap on here and you create a mask, you can do various different things to your mask layer. So if I zoom in on that, I'm going to use the Apple Pencil, so you can see perhaps it affects some of the details here, but it isn't affecting the original layer. It's only creating like a duplicate that is over the top where the changes are being impacted, but actually you can get rid of those. So it's a way of experimenting on a layer without actually damaging or impacting the original layer it's copied from, which can be really useful. So obviously if you're creating a layer mask, it's quite easy to just delete it as well. So okay, one of the most important things you're going to want to do is add some adjustments. So that comes with different effects, different kind of ways to adjust all the different aspects of your image, so the colour, maybe the blur, all sorts of things like that. The most basic one is your opacity. So as I showed you earlier, you can swipe up and down to affect the opacity. You can apply a blur. So you press on that and you can slide up and down. If I go back out on the image, you'll see that a bit more effectively. So if I go up and down, you can see it blurring the details on a particular layer. You can create a motion blur. And again, if you move your finger, rotate your finger, you'll see that it rotates it as well as affects. It's two different functions actually with the motion blur. If you notice, it goes straight up and down in terms of the strength of the blur, but then also the kind of the rotation of it too. You've got perspective blur as well. So obviously wherever you put this is going to be the center of your perspective. So it all kind of blurs to a vanishing point, if you like. So this is going to be where the center of your blur effect is going to be. So if you want to move it to here, this is where the clearest bit is going to be. If you like, you can turn the effect up or down. You've got a sharpening. You can really just improve the vividness of the lines and the marks that you're making. You probably notice that more as you zoom in and move it up and down. You can see it just sharpening up the edges a little bit, like so. You've got noise, so you can see it really adds a kind of a grain to it. And then you've got the hue saturation and brightness. So you can change the hue of a particular layer. The saturation is the strength of the colour, so you can make it black and white or more vivid. You can make it darker or you can make it lighter. And if you want to reset it, you can click that. If you don't want the preview on, so if you've got it here and you want to go back to the original rather, so you press it and it takes it back to your original thing, let go and it shows you the preview. you just want to undo. Okay, so you've got the colour balance. If you go into here, you can really push either the shadows towards the red, the mid-tones towards the red, or the highlights towards the red. Or you can push it towards more the cyans. Likewise, you can push the mid-tones or the shadows. So there's various different things you can control, and then you can reset it. Really quite useful sometimes for just shifting the tone of your piece of work. If it's somehow just not quite working quite right, it feels a bit too pitched into warmer colours, you can just change it a little bit. Another way of doing that is to use the curves. So you've got all the different colours here. You've got the red, green and blue, and you can shift all of the different values here and just experiment with it. Sometimes you might find that just by changing the different elements, then you can get something quite interesting. Another thing that you can do is use the recolor. So if you click on that, it gives you a little cursor, and it uses the selected color you've got up here, and you can just use it and it will fill in a certain... It works better if there's a flatter kind of color as well. Okay, moving along. So you've got the adjustments that we've explored. We're now going to go on to the selection. So you can use this if you're on a layer that actually has some information to draw a selection of a bit that you want to change. In order to close that loop, that shape, you need to click on the grey circle, and now that line disappears, but there is an area, say here for example, where this area is selected but this is not. Now you can actually do the inverse of that by clicking this button, and now it's the outside that's selected but this shape that you've drawn isn't. But whilst that's selected, you can change aspects of the selected area, so you can just affect the hue and colour and saturation and brightness of that particular part. Another aspect you can do is to simply use taps. So that's the starting point. If you know you need to go a straight line to here, and it snaps to that area, and you want to create another line here. And if you've got a more geometric shape with straight lines, just a series of taps will allow you to, perhaps with a bit more precision, straighter edges. I mean, this is quite an organic shape, but you can see that this is quite a good way of selecting even that area then as well. Obviously, another aspect of when I've got selected is that I can just paint inside the area, and you can see if I'm just rough, it's only going to paint inside the area and not on the outside. You'll notice that you can make various selections drawing into the areas. You can notice the bits that are not selected by the kind of lines, and then all these different shapes I've just drawn are now selected. If you've made a selection and you want to clear it all, you can click that. If you've drawn something and you've done it in a couple of movements and you just want to undo the last section of that selection, then you can do it on the undo and the redo. Another way of using the selection tool is to have it on automatic. Click on an area, and then by moving in left and right, it changes the selection threshold. If you want to change just the area that's just been selected, then you can do that in this area here. Or you can paint over it. So if you want to paint in that area only. Then along here we have the transform tool. So anything that would happen to be on that layer can now be controlled here. So you can see I've just reduced, that's the background, and I've just pinched in and out to reduce the size of it. I can rotate it. I can distort it by pulling from one of the edges. If I press and hold, you'll see it starts to distort it. It can be really useful if you're wanting to apply a texture to something that's going off into perspective or a surface. It can be really useful that. So you can really make it fit more of a geometric shape perhaps. Obviously if you've got a particular section that you have selected, works exactly the same way, and then you go on to transform. You can transform just that particular area, rotate it, again distort it, anything you want with just that particular part as well. So you can use combinations of the different selections and the transform tools and the adjustments. They all kind of work together to really create the kind of effects and the kind of things that you'd want to do. If when you're using the transform and you want to just be able to squish it left and right from the corners and every which way, then use it on the free form. If you want the basic proportions and to be kept to the initial ratio, then you put it on magnetic, and then unless you pull from the edges, because that will distort it, if you pull from the corners, it will keep the ratio the same. So it's not going to distort your image, it'll just reduce the scale, so you can rotate it and reduce the scale and increase the scale. If you have a particular section, for example, let's just select an area here, and you've got it here. If you want to make it fit the canvas, now it fits the entire expanse of the canvas. Now it's not going to be very particularly useful for this particular image, but again, just like with the other tools, you've got the undo and redo. If you've got something that you've selected here, you can flip it on the horizontal or the vertical. You can rotate it by 45-degree increments, so you're all the way back to the beginning, or you can just undo anything that you've just selected and transformed. If you have a selection of a particular shape, so again, I'm just going to select a random area and select it, you can move it around like this, so you can just sort of nudge it just ever so slightly into the position that you want. It's really quite great for getting things exactly lined up in detail where you need them. Now, actions are the kind of things that you might want to do after you've completed a work or at the beginning of a piece of work. There's all sorts of quite fundamental things here. This one is quite simply inserting a file or a photo or taking a photo with the camera. You can cut copy, copy canvas or paste in there as well. That deals with the image. The canvas here, you can add a perspective guide, which will go and deal with that a bit more. You can flip the canvas horizontally or vertically, or you can get canvas information. Now there's all sorts of information here about the number of maximum layers you can use, how many layers you have used, the video length when you play it back, the track time working on a particular image this session. You can share in all these different formats. If you choose JPEG, then it will ask you where you want to share it to. You've got your video, so you can replay the recording. This happens to be the beginning of that, and if you want to whiz through that a bit more quickly, you can slide it across until you get to the very end. You can choose to have a time-lapse recording or not. If you don't want it to record, then you do it like that. If you do want it to record, start that. You can actually start a live broadcast, so you could put onto YouTube, for example, or you can export your time-lapse video from here as well. You've got different preferences here. Now, if you're working outside in the sun or a sunny bright environment, you might want to use a light interface. So it might really help you to see your tools and your canvas more clearly. You might want to change to a right-handed interface where everything or this part of it flips over to this side. You might find that more useful. You may wish to have a brush cursor. So you'll notice, if you look very carefully, especially if I turn the brush size up, there's just before I commit, in fact if I turn the opacity down you'll see it more clearly, near the nib there is an actual circle. So it gives you a cursor as a guide to what you actually go out to draw. You can AirPlay canvas to an AirPlay device. The rapid undo delay is if you hold down two fingers and keep them held down, then it will start to undo all your previous things, and that's the delay on it really. So if you have it to be over a second, you'll have to hold your two fingers down for quite a while before it will start rapidly undoing all your previous actions. I prefer generally not to use that. I do them individually, so I have it somewhere set slightly higher up, so I have to hold it down for quite a while before it activates. You've got your Quickline delay, which was covered earlier. So if you want to snap to a straight line, you have to hold it down at the end of that line for a period of time, and then it'll snap to a straight line. There is an auto hide interface, so this is the interface with all the icons. You can have it set to hide the interface after 10 seconds or a period of time. I have it disabled. I don't want it to hide the interface at all. You can have the selection mask visibility, so you may find that what I was drawing before, you couldn't see the straight lines very clearly. If you have it like this, you'll be able to see it, and you won't be able to see the background for that matter, but it depends how you want it. I tend to have it quite low really, as long as I can see it. I mean, normally I'm not working on camera, so it's fine. You have the option to connect a third-party stylus, although with the Apple Pencil I don't know why you would do that. You can edit the pressure curve. Now this is an incredibly useful thing to be able to do. If you have it pitched quite steeply at the beginning, then it takes less pressure to start to make a mark. What I found is by default it requires you to add quite a bit of pressure to the screen with your Apple Pencil before it starts to make a mark, and it used to annoy me quite a bit really. So now I'm applying pressure, but it's hardly showing anything. I have to press really hard before it even becomes visible. So what I do now on those settings is that I make it quite steep at the beginning and just sort of gentle it out at the end. So now when I press, I don't have to press as hard to get a mark, and if I press really hard then obviously it changes. But those first marks are not too difficult to make. Just a little bit of pressure now is all I need to make. And here we have the advanced gesture controls. So for example, with my Apple Pencil, what I want it to do is use the selected tool. I don't want it to be only those other aspects. You could have it for paint only, or smudge only, or erase only. But I want it to be whatever's selected as my tool. That's what I want the Apple Pencil to do. Now, when it comes to touch, you might find that you don't want to draw with your finger inadvertently. You only want to draw with the Apple Pencil. If that's the case, you can either put it to erase only, but then you might accidentally find yourself erasing small areas or smudging small areas. So I put it on gestures only. So that's just your multiple swipes, you're pinching in and out. So the only thing that my hand will do are the kind of general gestures. I won't be able to draw or erase with my fingers anymore. So that's really completely useful for me, and it gets rid of this need for palm rejection. We've got the eyedropper selection, so you can choose how you will select the eyedropper and how long you might need to hold down for. And we've got quick menu options as well, which is from the little icon there. And again, if I just set it so you can tap it, or you might set it so you have to hold it in other areas. So this is your quick selection. So when I click that, I have the option to create a new layer, flip horizontally, copy, merge down, clear layer, or flip vertically. And we have the help option. So you can ask what's new. It gives you a video, it tells you what's new to Procreate. You can restore purchases. You get to your advanced settings and various different things, ways of receiving help or leaving reviews, etc. Okay, one of the other important features is perspective guide. So the first thing you need to do on the canvas is turn on the perspective guide, and then once it's enabled you can edit the perspective guide. You have down here the opacity of the lines that you're going to add, and then the width and size of the lines that you're going to add as well. So the first thing you need to do perhaps is create a vanishing point. So if I just turn the thickness of the lines up so you can see that, and you can see all these lines go towards that vanishing point. And you can move that vanishing point anywhere on your canvas. If I just zoom in a little bit, you'll see it more clearly. But that's obviously just your single vanishing point, which is useful for an awful lot of cases. But you can create 1, 2, or 3 point perspectives. If you want to change the horizon line, which is the strongest blue line here, there is a little dot around the edge. If you do it anywhere else on the circle it won't work, but there is a little blue dot there. So it might be, for example, that although that's the vanishing point, that might be the horizon line, you might be a character that's looking at it from an unusual angle, or your horizon line is not going to be straightforward left to right. It might be off at an unusual angle like that, but there's your vanishing point on a weird looking horizon. So you can create a more dynamic looking composition that way. If you want to add a second perspective, you just click somewhere on the line there and you can move it on that line so it becomes further away or closer to. That helps just create 2 sensors, or the sense of it going off in 2 separate directions. So if you wanted to create like a cube with 2 facets that will vanish to 2 different vanishing points, that's how you would do that. So it might be like the corner of a building, so a road that goes up here and a road that goes up there, and then they meet in this section, which is the corner of 2 buildings, for example. If you want to create a third vanishing point, click on the line and then move it, and you've just created a third vanishing point now. If you've created a vanishing point and you want to get rid of it, all you do is tap on it and delete it. Simple as that. If you are working on a particular layer, I'm going to create a new layer, and you want to use Perspective Assist now. what you'll find is that if I go to an appropriate colour that you'll see, if I'm drawing a line, in fact I'll choose a bigger line so you can see it. If I'm drawing a line now, it's going to be impossible for me to go up here anywhere else. I can go backwards and forwards along there, but it won't allow me to deviate from that at all. So I can go over that and really create a line that works in connection with that, but I can't go this way in a way that's awkward. I can either go horizontal, I can go vertically, or I can go with the vanishing point, which can be really useful for perspective drawing, for technical drawing. See, for example, you can really draw shapes that fit to a vanishing point. I mean, this isn't very good because I'm just doing it very quickly as a demo, but you get the idea. One of the worst cubes I've ever drawn, but it gives you the sense of it anyway. Only the layer that you've actually clicked on and activated layer assist will have that activated. So if you've drawn a box or a cube with a layer that's got layer assist, maybe use another layer. You can add shading on the other layer, see how it goes. Or you could even draw your straight lines on the layer with a layer assist, and then on another layer on top of it, you could use that as a way of tracing over it for the bits that you want to have those lines on anyway. Okay, as I briefly touched on before, one of the really useful things within the new Procreate is the quick menu. Now, you've got all the different options here. If you've got it set so that in preferences, I'll just go on to it, different ways that you can access it. So it gives you a range of options here. You can choose to not use it at all, but if you want to use it, you can use it with different methods here. So I've got it by tapping on that little icon, but also have it by touching and holding. So maybe I'm going to have it so you have to touch and hold it quite a while, just for the benefit of showing this demo really. Normally I would just have it set to that icon. So if I'm doing the touching and holding, you'll see it opens it out. If I want to, for example, choose a new layer, I can just swipe up to the top and it's created a new layer. I'll hold that down again and you can see that it's got a copy option. And so by swiping to that, it will have copied, and then I can paste that later on. Another one, like I say, if I click on there, it's exactly the same thing. A way of editing your different options here are to press it, and you can see you can change. So it could be layer opacity, click and hold. You can have it to be a whole manner of different things by scrolling up and down. Just a couple of quick comments about the Apple Pencil. If you're not familiar with it, then it's perhaps just important to become aware of it. So when you're in your Apple Pencil settings, there's all sorts of things that you can change here to affect it. But generally speaking, I think a lot of people like the pressure to affect the darkness of line, perhaps to affect the width of the line there as well. You can see that it's changing the width, but also the tilt to actually affect the type of mark that you get as well. So you can see there that the tilt is like shading from the side of a pencil. And you can even apply the pressure like that as well. So it just becomes really like a natural feeling tool. Anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed watching this tutorial. If you want to, make sure you subscribe, press the bell notification next to the subscribe button to make sure that you're notified of all my future videos. I'd like to say a massive thank you to those people that have been over to my Patreon page and supported me there too. There is a link down in the description. But otherwise, I hope this has been useful. Please check out my future videos and I shall catch you back here again. See you later.